As good as it gets.
And then Grandpa, same thing.
Go ahead.
Leo, he went to, it was Halloween. He went and he cleaned out his basement. He painted it. He got the house all in order. He went upstairs, went to bed.
This is a 96-year-old man.
Yeah.
He's a 96-year-old man. He's doing all this work.
Yep. And then he went to bed, went to sleep, and that was it.
No. No.
He got up, got dressed, and went back to bed.
Oh, he was pristine when he dressed, right? Got up, dressed,
Shaved.
Went back to bed.
back to bed.
He had his suit on, and my brother was taken upstairs, and he came downstairs, and he called me, and he said, I don't know, but I think Grandpa's dead. And I said, well, I'll come over. So I went over, and he says to me, isn't that the best dead-looking person you ever saw? He was laying there like this.
Yep. He
In
went
his
on his
suit.
own terms.
Okay, are we all set?
We're all set.
Okay, let's go. What do you want to talk about?
My name is Lenny Linquata, and this is the story of my life. My father was born in 1865 in Palermo, Sicily. He fished only during the summer months. The rest of the year, he worked as a foreman on a large farm where he made a fair living. He came to Boston in the early 1900s with his son Luigi, who was 14 years old at the time, and his adopted son Salvatore. He bought a dory and went fishing for flounder with my brothers. He then peddled them in the streets of Boston. I was born November 1899. I was about 15 months old when my mother, my adopted sister Catherine, and I joined my father and brothers in the United States. We lived in Boston for about 3 years.
To me, my grandfather definitely is the epitome of class and brains, compassion, one of the kindest souls you'll ever meet, and also extremely ambitious, forward-thinking, innovative, just kind of like a Renaissance man.
I had the opportunity to actually work on my grandpa. I guess you would call it work when I was really young. I used to work with my dad down the fish plant, and I used to deliver oil on the oil truck for a little while. And when I got a little older, I went and worked at the Progressive Oil Company, and I cleaned furnaces and I delivered oil also. And I looked at my grandfather in a little different way. I found him to be very up with the current events, very up with current trends. He was always ahead of the curve. Very, very intelligent. For a man who had basic education, 6th grade, he was one of the smartest men I ever met, ever. He was on top of it, sharp as a tack. Even at the time of his death, he was as sharp a man as I've ever met. He wasn't against anything, but he always said, you do everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
Everything, that was
his secret to a long life.
He used to say that all the time.
Everything in moderation.
You do anything, but you do everything in moderation.
I don't quite get the moderation as good as he did.
You're not old enough yet. It strikes all of us.
But yeah, I absolutely, I think I have some of his business sense, clearly not as much as he did. I wish I did. So many times I wish he was still around to ask questions about the business and things. But when we started Neptune's Harvest, he was a big advocate. He said, this is going to be very successful. He knew it. And I would go there at lunch and have lunch with my grandparents, and I would ask him questions. I would pick his brain. When my son was little, I brought him over there every day to visit and pick his brain, and I bounce things off of him. But I definitely feel like I got a lot of the entrepreneur and the business and, the family bonds. Like, we're cousins, but we're also friends. We hang out together. We're socially friends with almost all my cousins I'm good friends with. So I think, the family bond, keeping all the traditions together where we, every 4th of July, every Labor Day, every holiday, we all still get together as a family.
By this time, my parents had saved enough money to buy a 40-foot gasoline-powered boat, which my father used to catch sardines. Then one day, my father decided to try something new. He made a drag net and used it to catch flounder in Boston Harbor. He caught quite a few flounder. We stayed in Fort Square in Gloucester, Massachusetts for 3 summers before we moved there permanently.
And he was well respected. He had a mannerism about him that people liked him. People listened to him and wanted to work with him, and maybe stepped out of their comfort zone a little bit and trusted him because of his demeanor, that, he was a true leader. And even the teacher when he was 14 said, I'm not going to let you quit school. I'm going to send the truant officer after you, because she saw the potential in him, but he wanted to support the family and go fishing, and he didn't think the truant officer would find him out at sea. So he did leave school and went fishing at 14. You think of a 14-year-old kid nowadays, can they go fishing, what it takes to go fishing, especially on the boats they had back then? They didn't have the radar, the sonar, the same comforts that the fishermen have now, and they went out far offshore and were gone a lot longer, and they were probably sleeping 4 hours a day, if that. They were working about 20 hours a day. Think of a 14-year-old now doing that.
In 1917, my father bought one of the first diesel engine boats, the Mayo II. I was 18 years old then, and I continued to fish with him. We went seining for mackerel in the summer and dragging for groundfish in the winter. During the time I fished on the Mayo II, I met my future wife, Ann Molloy. I courted her for 3 years, and we were married in November of 1923. First, we lived in an apartment on Commercial Street where we had 2 children, Mike and Rosalie. In 1927, a real estate agent approached me and told me about a house for sale on Church Street.
And I went way back to when he was first courting my grandmother, and he wrote poems and songs for her. And he sent her elaborate valentines, which were unbelievable at the time, because men just never showed that at that time. And he was out fishing and wrote love letters and things like that.
His cousin, I guess, would smuggle the love letters in to her, because her father didn't want any part of this, and he was, trying to secretly court her. We all got copies of all the love letters he wrote to my grandmother when he was out on schooners fishing. And he started every letter with, "My dearest Anna," and I'm named after my grandmother, Ann. And then he ended the letters with, "Until I see you again, I send you an ocean of love and a kiss on every wave." And how romantic is that?
So he had a lot of different sides to him, but the side I knew was loving and kind and always gave good advice.
My son Mike went into the service, where he became a prisoner of war. Rosalie went to college, and then she got married. Julia and Anita graduated from high school and got married soon thereafter. Mary Ann was still in high school. We sold our house on Church Street for $10,000 to our daughter Julia and her husband Salvatore. We then gave each of our children $2,000, so this eliminated the $10,000 we made from the sale of the home. We bought our house on 10 Hubbard Street in 1953, and my wife, my daughter Mary Ann, and I moved in. My wife Ann enjoyed decorating the house very much. Under her touch, it transformed so beautifully that the Gloucester Daily Times even wrote a story about how lovely our home was.
It was family-centric from the moment we were all born. My grandparents had a very unique ability to make each one of us grandchildren feel as though we were the favorite one. When you have 16, that's pretty remarkable. That's a pretty remarkable thing.
And we spent a lot of time with them. It wasn't just every Sunday and every holiday. As Lenny said, he came to the beach with us every day in the summer. After work, he would meet us down at Wingasheek Beach. We would still be there at 6 o'clock at night. He would take off his jacket and his tie, roll up his pants, walk down the beach, start digging clams, get his lemon, cut open the clam, and eat the clams as he went along. And he did that. And we would leave the beach at 7, 8 o'clock at night, come back at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Singing "Row, row, row your boat" all the way home. And 99 bottles of beer on the wall. My grandfather, I walk on the beach. I love walking on the beach. My grandfather was a prolific walker on the beach. Even in his late 80s, he would walk with his daughters on that beach for miles and miles. And I remember my aunts coming back and saying, what is with him? We can't barely keep up with him. What were they? 20 years younger than him anyway, right?
Yeah, easily.
At least 20, they couldn't barely keep up. And he would walk for miles every day, every single day.
Yeah.
And I think of that all the time. And when I walk the beach, I think of that all the time.
While fishing on the Pilot, I had an accident which resulted in the loss of one of my fingers. I felt that I had to repair the engine of the boat. There was a long set screw sticking out of the shaft, and I caught my hand between the shaft and the flywheel. One of my crewmates had to hit the flywheel with the sledgehammer to break it apart and make it turn so that I could pull my hand out, but my fingers were crushed. At Addison Gilbert Hospital, the doctors wanted to amputate all of my fingers. My parents asked me if I could make it to Boston, to Peter Dent, at Brigham Hospital, which is now Brigham and Women's. Dr. Kaiser cleaned me up, bandaged me up, and I waited a few days to see what would happen. The outcome was that I eventually lost one of my fingers.
So he was a fisherman only till he was in his 20s, right?
Yep.
I think losing a finger on the boat was really the impetus that got him off the boat, that gave him more reason to come on shore. But he didn't come on shore for the reason that he didn't want to go fishing. He came on shore because he saw opportunities to do other things that would improve his life. And I think that's what did it.
I think it was more of that also, but I really believe he had such a great wife. My grandmother was the best. He had such a loving wife. He had a lot of kids. He wanted to be around his kids and his wife and not be offshore missing them growing up and missing his wife. He was deeply in love with her and his family, and he did not want to be offshore while they're going through all their lives growing up, and he'd missed so many things, and I really think that was most of it. It was a great love affair, and if you read those love letters, you could see what a love affair. It was love at first sight. He would go, back in those days, you didn't, go courting unless you were engaged, and he would come over and pretend he was there to see her brother. And he'd stand in the doorway and they'd look at each other, but he couldn't go sit next to her. He couldn't take her out for a walk. So it was a lot of love letters that were sneaked to her, but it was a love affair, and he absolutely loved her from day one till the very last day. So, and she made a perfect home. She let him be the head of the household and the man that made all the decisions, and she thought that was the way it should be. She wasn't offended by it. She loved her role as homemaker, mother, and the caregiver. She ran a really beautiful home for him and made it very welcoming for everybody.
There would be lunch on the table for him every day, waiting for him.
And it wasn't a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
His meal for the day, his big meal for the day was always lunch. My grandmother prepared lunch. If there was just two people for lunch, or if one of us came over for lunch, or the kids were, the big meal of the day was lunch. She prepared him lunch every day. After lunch, he would go take a nap. He would take a nap for an hour, just about an hour. He would get up, he'd go back to work. He'd finish up 5, 6 o'clock. And that's how his day. His routine was always the same. Had the same routine all the time. What time is it? Oh, Grandpa's going to be home. All right. What time is it? Grandpa's taking a nap. Oh, Grandpa's back to work. All right. Amazing.
And she was the best cook ever.
She was a great cook.
She was an amazing cook. She could take 3 ingredients and make it the best meal you ever had in your life. Her secret ingredient was TLC. But I'd go over there when I worked on the wharf as a young teenager, and I'd go over there for lunch, and she'd say, "Oh, Ma, I have nothing to feed you. Come on, we'll have pickups." And the next thing you know, she'd be opening the refrigerator. She called leftovers pickups. And the next thing you know, there'd be a smorgasbord on the table of the best food you could ever imagine. Like, I have nothing to feed you, really? And then she'd be like, Manja, she'd love to see all of us eat, and our friends, and anybody that came over. Even my cousin Lenny's dog would come. He had no kids, and she'd feed Zeus spaghetti and meatballs. But she was never happier than seeing people eat. Italians show their love with food, and she was thrilled. And if you really didn't want any more, you'd have to go like this, because otherwise, and you'd have to cover your plate, because otherwise she thought you were just being polite, and she'd give you more. That's all she wanted to do, was make you happy and feed you.
Can you tell food was a big part of our life?
But it was.
It was
But
a
it's
big
sort of
part
is
of
with
our-
Italians anyway. It sort of
Yeah.
is a part. It's the part that brings us all together.
Yeah.
I was 10 years old, when my grandpa and my dad were working down the wharfs, I think your dad was over on Morning Star at the time,
Yeah, where the Coast Guard
the
station
Coast Guard
is now.
station, right? I think he was there. They were in the tuna business at the time. They were bringing in a lot of bluefin tuna, and every year, my aunts, all my aunts, the four sisters, and my grandmother would go to the house, and my father and my grandfather would bring a clean tuna. 500 pounds, 300 pounds, whatever it was, 200 pounds. He would bring it over the house, and for 2 days, they would cook tuna fish and boil it and put it and can it and put it in ball jars.
With the oil.
Cases and cases of it. Cases. And then they would divvy it all out. I was 10 years old before I realized that tuna fish came in a can. Mind you, every single day, I don't remember at grandma's house, but I think it was probably grandma's house too. Every single day, we did that with Governor Dino also. The eggplant, the canned eggplant, they would do cases and cases of it. And every single day, the condiments on that table were Governor Dina, a loaf of bread, some cheese, and tuna. And then you had dinner. And that was the standard condiments on the table. And I was about 10 years old before I realized this. Tuna fish comes in a can? I didn't even realize it. I was eating fresh tuna my whole life. I've been eating fresh tuna. And it was the best.
It was great.
It was unbelievable.
It was
unbelievable.
I'd go over a friend's house and they'd be like, "Oh, here's a tuna fish sandwich," and I'd be like, "This isn't tuna fish."
He had a beautiful flower garden.
Love it.
He
Dahlias.
dahlias
Dahlias.
and raspberries, and
Dahlias.
it was most men didn't do stuff like that. Right?
Plum trees, raspberries, and dahlias.
And the pear tree.
And the pear tree.
Yep.
Plums, pears, and dahlias. Love them. Love them. The most gorgeous dahlias you have ever seen. For years, he used to give me bulbs. For years. Right. You think I could grow a freaking dahlia? He'd even tell me how to put it in this bag, put it in a cool place, put it there, do this here. Everything he told me to do, I could never graze a freaking dahlia. Never. Ever. Now, I'm starting to grow dahlias in my backyard.
Are you?
Nice. We are too.
Dottie's doing it too.
Yep.
My wife is doing it now, so I'm gonna take over next. But the biggest and the most important things is making life better for other people, and I think he was pretty good at that. I think that was really one of his goals. He never flaunted money. That was never something that he ever did. He spent money, but he never flaunted, and he always did something for the community. Always, from the hospital to the symphony to the city government to the fishermen. I mean, he was always doing something, and he was very creative. At one point, I remember them saying that they were doing almost 1 million pounds of whiting a day. A day. Mm-hmm. 1 million pounds of whiting a day. And they were just pumping out production. And they were creative, and he moved from business to business depending on what the market called for at the time and where the trends were going to go. He had the ability to follow that along. And I think he was a good mentor for me, and I think I've had the ability to pretty much show that I've done the same.
Although we were successful fishing, I was not happy being away from my family, so I made up my mind to leave fishing. I approached my brother-in-law, Frank Favalora, and asked him if he'd be interested in starting a fish business. He said yes. So we found a wharf for sale by Charlie Nelson, and we paid him $9,000 for it. I wanted the business to be a co-op, so many people could join, but the fishing captains from the other boats objected to the idea. So I decided that Frank and I would do it ourselves. We hired a lawyer named Davis, and we formed our own corporation in 1930. Lawyer Davis suggested that we call it Progressive Fish Wharf Incorporated, because he felt that we were progressive, especially at that particular time in history, considering the rest of the country was in an economic depression. We did it, but it meant I had to drop my wages from $50 to $20 a week.
As I got older, I also started 2 businesses, and I was very successful at it too. And I went back to school in my 50s, and I think he taught us that life doesn't stop because you're 40 or 50. He was at 90 still thinking of ways to start new business.
Oh, he approached me.
Always.
At 90, he approached me.
I'm not kidding.
Oh, yeah.
And he never stopped thinking. His mind was always churning about how we could make this city better. It was all about this city, too. His love for Gloucester and community was well known.
Our grandparents had a house where the St. Peter's statue was bought. The very first time Mr. Vavaza came and had St. Peter, it was in the downstairs where my grandparents and my mother was born, your father was born. They lived upstairs. My mother was born the year of the very first Fiesta, right above St. Peter in that house. And he was good friends with all those people that started the Favazas and the people that started the Fiesta. He was very instrumental in starting the Fiesta. He was on the original Fiesta committee, and he was on the board his whole life. They gave him an award when he was an old man. We all went down there to the altar. Remember that?
Yeah.
But he was one of the first Fiesta committee and very instrumental in starting the St. Peter's Fiesta.
Over the years, I was very active in community affairs. I feel especially proud of my involvement in establishing the St. Peter's Club. This is how it all came about.
So there was a fund established in Gloucester with all the fishermen, and they would donate half of 1% of their catch, the money they made from each trip when they unloaded, to a building fund for the fishermen. And there was started to get some infighting amongst the fishermen, like this guy didn't pay his half of 1%, why should I pay mine? And some fishermen went down and they picketed down in front of Producer's Fish Company down in the port, where they were unloading a lot of boats at the time. And he said to them, a lot of the fishermen started saying, I don't want to pay that money anymore, and I want my money back that I've put in. So my grandfather got a call saying, Leo, can you come down here and help this situation, mitigate it? So he went down and he said, no, we're not giving any money back to any of the boats that have already contributed. We'll stop taking the half of 1% of all the trips, but we're going to take the money we've already made and we're going to buy a club for the fishermen. So where the St. Peter's Club is now, there was another building at the time, and it was for sale. It was owned by a bank. I want to say it was the Cape Ann Savings Bank, and they was for sale for $12,000 at the time. And he went to the bank and he negotiated down to $10,000 because it was for a good cause. It was going to be a club for the fishermen. So they bought that building for $10,000, and that's how the St. Peter's Club got started.
Well, it's still in its existence, and people still use the club as a social place. I think that's important.
Also, around this time, 1957 or so, I bought the dock where the Gloucester House restaurant is now. The reason I bought the dock was that I had at least 12 boats buying oil from us, and I wanted them to be able to tie up at that dock. Meanwhile, a fellow approached me and asked if I could rent him a spot there so he could put in a restaurant. I consulted with my son Mike, and he said that he wanted to put a restaurant there. I told him if that was so, I would buy a new building for him. He got himself two partners, Kay Spittle and his friend, Perry Massey. The Gloucester House restaurant opened in 1958.
He ended up setting up the whole family, every one of his kids, with a good livelihood through themselves or their husbands in forming businesses, buying property, and getting everybody started.
In 1958, I asked my two son-in-laws, Libby Kukuru and Salvatore Scandolito, who are both fishermen, if they would be interested in the make food business, and they both accepted my offer. So I helped them get started with conveyors and brokers. They slowly developed a very successful business. They were so successful together that they bought Harbor Cove Fisheries. Ironically, I had previously owned Harbor Cove.
So he took care of all 5 of his children, made sure they were financially secure and had good businesses. So when he passed, everybody was left with a very good, they weren't given anything. They took the ball and ran with it and created these successful businesses in their own merit. But they were given a jump start by him buying all this property with his foresight And when he passed, everybody was well to do. They had, enough money that nobody was fighting over everything because they were all well-established businesses.
I had to think back in the 60s that even women in Gloucester were told by their guidance counselors, why bother go to college? You're a woman. And my grandfather didn't feel that way. You can do anything you want. And he made us feel that we could do anything we wanted. And we could, even if we did something for 10 years, if we wanted to change and move with the times, we could do that. We have to be constantly learning. It doesn't stop when you leave school.
He never said to any of us that we had to go to college. He said that you had to learn.
Right.
And that's what it was. The world was his classroom. I think that's a good way to put it. And all of us, I think we've all pretty much learned that.
My wife and I took many trips together throughout the years. We went to Europe 6 times, traveling in Italy, Sicily, Portugal, Spain, France, and Scotland. We also traveled to South America, Mexico, Canada, and to most of the Caribbean islands, including Haiti, Cuba, Nassau, Bermuda, Jamaica, St. Thomas, and Curacao, as well as to many of the Virgin Islands and even Hawaii. We've also been all over the United States. We took one trip to Sicily with Philip Cooker and his wife Grace, my son-in-law, and with his parents. On another trip that my wife and I took, we were flying from Lisbon, but halfway between Lisbon and the Azores, the plane engine conked out. The captain decided to stop at Santa Maria in the Azores. We were forced to spend Christmas. They opened the bar for us and told us we could have anything we wanted. Boy, they really did treat us good. They repaired the engine with parts they got from France. We then proceeded back to the United States with no further trouble. Another time we were coming home from the Azores when we encountered strong headwinds and a snowstorm. So we landed in Gander, Labrador. We refueled and headed on our way. After that, we decided we better not go to the Azores anymore.
Yeah.
He saw the bigger picture for sure. And, we can't forget about how he was a world traveler. And I think that makes a difference in everyone's life. So he was on one of the first flights across the country. They also went to South America. I mean, really, nobody went to South America from Gloucester.
You were going to Jamaica in the 50s.
And even in his 90s, he went.
Love Jamaica.
Yeah.
Love Jamaica.
That was his last
Loved
trip.
it.
Jamaica.
Right. I want to go back to Jamaica.
Yeah.
But I never, ever, ever heard him raise his voice. He might have to my dad, but he certainly didn't do it to any of us. I mean, I should know. Let's see. I crashed an oil truck. I dumped oil out in the street twice. I put oil in a house that didn't even have oil. and none of that faced him at all. Remarkable. You would have thought, he just let it go. He never, ever, ever said anything to us. Never.
All in all, I have had a really good life. I had a wonderful lady by my side for 70 years. She raised 5 children and kept a lovely home. She took care of my mother for 17 years. She created a warm, loving atmosphere in her home where all her family, including grandchildren and great-grandchildren, gathered on Sundays and on holidays. During the war, she made bandages for the servicemen, and for many years, she sewed johnnies for the sick at Addison Gill Hospital. She spent her time visiting the sick and even visiting shut-ins at the local nursing home. After the years, we took in fresh air children in the summer. We brought them new clothes and had their hair done. We became involved in the exchange student program, and students from all over the world would meet at our home for 2 days at a time. Our 5 children went on to produce 18 grandchildren and 29 great-grandchildren. My wife Ann passed away on December 24th, 1993, but she left me with wonderful memories of our beautiful life together.
Our grandma was getting older. She was in her 80s, almost 88 when she passed away, right?
She was 88.
She was 80 when she passed away. So it must have been around, she was 87 years old at the time or whatever. And she had told June, she had been suffering from Parkinson's disease for maybe 8 to 10 years prior. But I mean, it was under control and she was all right. But she had told June that she was ready to die and she was going to die on Christmas Eve.
She had a dream, and God told her she was going to He was going to take
God,
her
oh, is that what it was?
on Christmas Eve.
God told her she was going to
Yes,
die on
in the
Christmas
dream.
Eve, in her dream. And we used to all, as a family, go spend every single Christmas Eve at my grandma's house. But she was insistent that we would all go to the house. And June, being the nurse of the family, you are such a loving person. Being the nurse of the family, she was the person in charge and watching grandma. And we had all the cousins there, and all the daughters, and everybody was there, right? The whole family was there.
Grandchildren.
Every single family
the
member,
grandchildren,
yeah.
everybody was there. And she insisted upon seeing every one of us. And she spoke our piece, and she had that ability to make every one of us feel as though we were the favorite person, her favorite person. And at the end of the night, we all went away after we had all seen Grandma, and it was just Grandpa and June and Grandma. And we were all home in our beds. And then at this point, I think, June, you take over.
Well, then my children were still believing in Santa Claus, so I went downstairs. We didn't have cell phones back then. And I called my husband to wish him a Merry Christmas. And when I went upstairs, she had passed. And it was about 11:30 at night. So she got her wish. She died on Christmas Eve.
A year later. Then
year later,
then God
she-
told her he didn't specify what year, but she woke up on Christmas Day and was so mad at God. I thought you were gonna take me, you promised me. And she lasted a whole other year until Christmas Eve.
She waited a whole year. My grandfather, she wanted all new bills to give to the kids, the grandchildren. So my grandfather would go to the bank and he'd get like 100 $1 bills, brand new. He'd give them to my grandmother, and like a week later, she'd say, Lee, she called him Lee.
Lee. Yeah, Lee.
Lee, I need money. And he'd say, but Ann, I just gave you, all these ones. And she said, I gave them to all the kids, right? So he's, okay, all right. So he never questioned her, would bring more money into the house, dollar bills, right? After my grandmother died, they were cleaning out the house. She had this built-in sofa in one of her sitting rooms. And my aunts opened up the sofa. There was 6,000 $1 bills in there.
You can't write this stuff, so. You can't write it.
We were all sitting around the table one day talking about, I didn't feel old till I was 50. I didn't feel old till I was 70. How about you, Grandpa? I didn't feel old till I was 90. And it was true. He didn't.
He didn't look old either.
I know.
No, he baby skin. He had the softest skin at 90 years old.
No wrinkles.
Nothing. It was like, oh, look at the baby.
Smooth.
Huh?
I don't know.
What beautiful.
He
skin.
never yelled. Maybe that was his secret.
I remember him going over the house. We'd go over his house, right? He used to sit down and they had this lazy boy chair. And you see, if he knew the kids were coming over, he put a bunch of change in his pocket. Because he knew that if he leaned backwards, the change would roll out and go underneath the thing. We'd all scurry over behind the thing and say, oh, I got a quarter.
All the kids would crawl under the chair to find the change. If you ask any of the great grandchildren, they all have that same memory. You know,
My grandfather
he dressed to
was
the
just
nines
like-
all the time. I had people tell me, I remember your grandfather. He was always a gentleman. He would work down the fish wharf in a suit every day. Nobody had fish. Everybody had flannel shirts and work pants. But your grandfather would show up to work every day down the fish wharf in a suit.
I mean, absolutely. If we were to write the story, no one would believe how lucky and fortunate we have been as a family. We have been blessed. All of us, we have been blessed. Not only did our grandparents live a long, long life. My grandmother lived to be 88. My grandfather lived to be 96. My father lived to be 96. My aunt lived to be 94?
95.
95. My other aunt, 90. And my aunt is still alive at 93.
Yeah.
At 93. All of them were alive until this past year.
Yeah, except Aunt Mary Ann is the only one.
Except
that
my
passed
aunt Mary,
She
who
was
passed
50.
away
She had
at 50
cancer.
years old. But all 4 of them made it to mid-90s. A remarkable.
We have longevity in
remarkable
our
people.
family.
So you people, whether you like it or not, are going to be stuck with us for a long time.
Knock on wood.
At the time, we felt blessed, but we didn't know how really lucky we were until we looked back on it. And we had a special life, really. He taught us a lot.